Spoiler warning. The following is an in-depth story analysis. If you haven't seen this arc, you may want to before watching this review. Also, at the beginning of this video, we'll be covering something which I neglected to include within my previous one. You have been warned. Up until this point, and just before the Battle City semifinals concluded, Seto Kaiba mentioned that he would be holding the Battle City finals atop a duel tower, which, according to him, is the same location in which he left his stepfather Yugioh to die. This is a pretty cruel fate, unless the stepfather was abusive or something. But even then, why leave him on an island with no food or water and just leave him to die like that? But then again, this arc has some major character development, both for Seto and Mokuba. But we'll talk about that development later. Anyway, the arc begins with the Kaiba craft being forced to change course. We also learn a lot more about Kaiba Corp's beginnings. Originally, it was founded by Seto and Mokuba's stepdad, Yugioh, in order to produce weapons for the military, such as missiles, nukes, all that good stuff. Besides, everyone knows that everything is better with explosions. Sarcasm. Anyway, Seto later took over the company, and he changed all of what Yugioh was doing, moving the company into the modern era, which is why the finalists have the dual disc systems that they do. Kaiba then barks at Mokuba for explaining this, and states that the information which went on between him and Yugioh is private. The situation gets much worse, however, as the craft begins to descend rapidly towards the ocean. However, they all manage to survive, with Joey once again contemplating whether or not he should file a lawsuit. Oh, Joey, your antics never cease to amuse me. However, a new person suddenly appears on the craft's main deck screen. This is Noah, who says that he and Seto have a long history, although Seto doesn't know what he's talking about. The craft is forced to land, upon which the entire crew is forced to exit the craft under threat of being stunned. Although in the original Japanese version, they were forced to exit under threat of execution. Anyway, the group, save Yami Merrick, are led down a hall where they are reintroduced to the Big Five. That's right, the villains from the Legendary Heroes arc. It's revealed that the Five were trapped in the game after the end of that arc, but the Big Five explains that they were uploaded into Noah's mainframe, and that the only way for them to escape is to win a Door Monsters tournament. The Big Five then explain their motive behind this tournament. If they can defeat Yugi and his friends, then the Big Five can steal their bodies, which means that they can escape back into the real world. The group then explains, through a test duel, the new rule of the tournament, of the Deck Master. If this Deck Master is destroyed, the duelist automatically loses as well, and it's very similar to what Yami Merrick does with Shadow Duels. The Big Five then chooses who they will duel, separating each and every member of the group, including the non-duelists such as Taya and Serenity. Speaking of Serenity, when she falls, both Tristan and Duke run after her and fail to rescue her, which only serves to further cement the love triangle aspect, which I mentioned within the last video. Anyway, the group members each end up in different locations, showing off the world that they have just entered. Yugi is the first to duel, as he is forced to duel against Gansley, who has assumed the form of the Deep Sea Warrior. Yugi then transforms into Yami Yugi, and the two begin their duel. Now for some cleaning up to do. I'm kind of on the fence as to what exactly to call Yami Yugi in these reviews. After the Duelist Kingdom arc, he's known primarily as the Pharaoh or the Spirit. But according to Yu-Gi-Oh! Wiki, he's listed as either Yami Yugi, the Nameless Pharaoh, Atem, Pharaoh, Yu-Gi-Oh!, or simply Dark Yugi, which admittedly is what he is known as in the original Japanese manga. So, what should I call him? To answer you simply, it doesn't really matter what name you give him as long as it is within the same context, as he is the same character regardless of the name choice. Also, a few people have been asking the question of dub preferences, so I think I'll answer that as well while I'm on this topic. For these reviews, I'm going strictly by the 4Kids dub of the anime, not only for nostalgic purposes, but also because I don't know of another outside of the original Japanese one. Not that I would choose one over the other, I just like comparing and contrasting things. Moving on. Yugi and Gansley continue their duel, with Yugi selecting Kuribo as his deckmaster. Now, Kuribo is an interesting choice. It's possibly one of the most iconic cards in the franchise's history, not just because of its power, but because of its sheer popularity. I mean, think about it. Yugi uses Kuribo to almost defeat Kaiba in Duelist Kingdom, he uses it to defeat Pegasus, and he uses it here. Its popularity only soars once we get to GX, but this is just the beginning. Now, an acknowledgement I have to make is in the area of voice acting. As I mentioned in part 1 of this review series, both Yugi and Yami are played by Dan Green, who pulls off both parts phenomenally well. The younger Yugi has a high-pitched voice, which is clearly not feminine, as you can obviously hear the bass, but the bass is far more prominent when Yami is in the driver's seat. Although for some reason when I was a kid, I thought that Yami sounded British the deeper I got into the series, such as after the Duelist Kingdom arc, when in reality, it was just Green getting more experience with the role and developing his voice accordingly for it. Interesting little tidbit. Anyway, Kaiba and Mokuba stumble across a virtual orphanage, with Mokuba expositing that it is the same orphanage in which they grew up. According to Seto, when their parents died, he and Mokuba were dumped off at the orphanage to wait for another family to take the two in. Seto then discovers to both his and Mokuba's shock that the younger versions of the pair are standing directly behind them, being dropped off at the same orphanage. Noah then explains that he tapped into their memories in order to create digital versions of their past, telling the brothers to, quote, enjoy the trip down memory lane. Now, remember when I said that this arc had some major character development for the Kaiba Bros? Well, this is where it begins, and it's very impressive, especially for a children's show. According to Mokuba, when they were little, Seto was the only one that cared about him at the orphanage. The younger Mokuba, who spent all day in a swing, then says that the reason he is so down is because he misses their parents, and that to him, it was unfair of them to leave the brothers alone and without a parental figure. That's actually a very understandable situation. There are a lot of kids, especially today, who are without their parents, or a guardian, and are wishing for something more, for substance, for intrigue, for answers. But then you've got the flip side, where sorrow eventually takes hold following a traumatic event. In this case, it's Mokuba's sorrow and his longing for his dead parents. And it's actually very well handled. But then Seto's next line cements how he was as a child, which harshly contrasts with how he is now. He says that the only way that they'll get through this is by getting tough. Now, this is a tricky phrase and category to digest. On one hand, getting tough means moving on and forgetting about sorrows or your past. But as a result, you don't learn anything at all from those experiences. You don't better yourself. On the other hand, if you look at your sorrow, try to look for answers, but not dwell on the pain. If you look for a solid reason as to why these things are happening to you, you can formulate a plan through which you can lessen the pain and learn from it. As Winston Churchill once said, success is not final, failure is not fatal, it is the courage to continue that counts.